Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Classical Antiquity Sidequest, a podcast covering topics from classical antiquity. The period of time is known for, as Edgar Allan Poe put it, the glory that was Greece, the grandeur that was Rome. Our next side quest will take us into magic, Christianity, and potentially upheavals in higher education. Who knows? We'll see where things go. Our guide for this side quest is Dr. Shaily Patel, a professor at Virginia Tech, go Hokies, who focuses on the relationship between magic and the development of Christianity. For people who listen for ACC football reasons, which I'm sure there are many, as there should be, Dr. Patel has deep ACC roots. We're talking triangle roots.
That's right. Tobacco Road.
In addition to teaching the Hokies, Dr. Patel has a PhD from North Carolina and completed her undergraduate work at Wake Forest. So again, wasn't making it up. Deep roots, old school, always keep the tournament in Greensboro. Doctor, who cares what Jim Boeheim thinks? I tell you, the antiquity folks are going to be like, what is this guy talking about? Dr. Shaily Patel.
Greensboro, yeah.
Exactly.
That's right.
Dr. Shaily Patel, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm hanging in there. It has been an incredibly long 2025. Feels like a
There's
decade, but I'm hanging in there. How are you?
there's a lot to unpack with that statement. And
Yeah, I just threw that in there.
we don't, I mean, I'm sure that the Brent Pry firing was exactly all you were referring to. And there was nothing modern about the return of cancel culture being done by the people who were formerly canceled. So now it's okay. I'm sure that has nothing to do with it. And
Nothing.
there's no concerns that you could possibly have about unconstitutional potential tariffs, although I am a lawyer. I'm not a tariff expert. I'm not going to comment on the legality of that other than to say I think it's odd the way it's happening, but there's like maybe three dudes in the whole world who know what tariff law is, and they are not coming on your podcast. And I'm sure you were not at all referring to the presence of troops in urban cities, urban centers, right? None of that. It's just all
Yeah,
about
federalized troops marching in American cities. Yeah, no, not concerning at all.
right.
Not
Just
concerning.
it's all about Brent Pry and where's Virginia Tech go from here. That's all
That's
your
all I
statement.
care about. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, on those some upheavals in higher education, we have seen through, and I do think this is problematic legally, but again, I'm not a constitutional law expert, so I will defer to people who are. We have seen a lot of oddly shakedown capitalism-ish developments in higher education where the administration says, remember all that money we gave you? Psych, we're taking it back unless you do exactly what we tell you. Free speech, Bill of Rights, Constitution, who cares? Legislative branch, Article 1, whatever. Who knew? Not a thing. Um, that seems to be having an impact on the institutions of higher education, including one down the road where you teach at. From what I'd read a little bit before today, can you, if you feel comfortable about it, talk about kind of what's been going on in Blacksburg, particularly with your department?
Yeah, sure. So the truth is that everything is sort of still in progress. Everything is up in the air. Details are being worked out. But those of us who are faculty in Virginia Tech's Department of Religion and Culture received an email about a week before class started telling us that our two-degree programs, one in religion and culture, the other one in humanities for public service, those two-degree programs are going to be discontinued and the department is going to be closed. So those programs will be discontinued at the end of this academic year. Our department will be dissolved in academic year 2026-2027. Faculty are being reassigned to other departments. So as far as we know, as of right now, like no one is being let go. That includes our contingent faculty and staff. So we are thankful for that, but we are very, very upset about the department being closed.
And you're still early in it, so it's hard to see how it's going to play out. I mean, I
Yeah.
had looked at a statement from the president and the senior vice president about, there could be a big impact on Virginia Tech's research budget, which again, it's the name, right? Virginia Tech. There's a lot of research.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, it's an engineering school in large part. It has a veterinary school there. We've had two pets go there. It's great. I mean, there's
Yeah, the vet school is magnificent. Yeah.
right. There's a lot of research money going into Virginia Tech. So
There.
I'm just curious, are there concerns about, hey, if Tech's losing money here, maybe they have to make some changes somewhere else, or is that just kind of how all of higher ed feels right now?
I think all of higher ed is probably feeling the squeeze unless you're at one of these schools with like a $6 billion endowment. Which to be fair, like Virginia Tech does have a multi-billion-dollar endowment, right? So we're talking about a school with a lot of money. But we are also expecting federal shortfall, right? Because of the way this administration is sort of holding on to money, the way that they've capped indirects, that's going to reverberate throughout the university. Um, Things like tariffs, right? Everything costs more. That also reverberates throughout the
I,
university.
we were promised though that other countries would pay that.
Yeah, I know. I know. It's funny how this works out, right? Unfortunately, other countries are not paying the tariffs. And so like, yeah, there are, Virginia Tech has financial concerns. I'll say this though, the last Board of Visitors minutes I looked at were the ones that were released in I want to say June. And in that set, they were talking about potential financial shortfall coming from the federal government. But they did say that Virginia Tech's finances look good right now. Like they look solid right now. So some of this seems to be anticipatory. Like the shuttering of the department seems to be an anticipation of a budget shortfall. We were also told that it wasn't just about the money. So there's that too. The the metric that we were given were number of majors. So schools are looking at things like number of majors to make these decisions.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you said too about the endowment, because my wife used to work in higher ed and now she works in for a private school in town, in development, what you would call development. And that was what she did at higher ed. Although I think they got spun around. I mean, you know how it is with like department names that gets changed and you get moved around, and
God.
it's yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't remember where she ended up, but in my mind, the rubric's development, and spending the endowment is a big deal because it's supposed to be there for the future of the university. And then with the tax policy from the first Trump administration, again, listeners can't see this, but you can see my W&L law shirt. W&L is being taxed on its endowment, right? But
Yeah.
you start spending that down, all of a sudden it's not there and it becomes a big problem. So there are schools who have had endowments that have spent it down and then they get into big trouble, right? So balancing those competing interests are hard. I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but as somebody who has spent too much time in his life interested in collegiate sports, the house settlement and the money sharing, which I think is a good thing. I mean, these athletes get
Yeah, I think athletes should be paid. Yeah.
well, yeah, exactly. They get the tar beat out of them,
Yep.
even not the high impact sports that we think of primarily, as we were talking about Virginia Tech's former football coach, but they have a very short shelf life. They should get paid. I just
And the
wonder,
school makes money off of them, right? Like that's the other thing. The school is
right,
making all of this money off of them. So, yeah.
right, right. But I wonder how that's going to change, like the house settlement and the
Mhm.
money that has to be shared. The universities used to have all this money, and of course they wanted to keep it, right? But now they have to share it. So how is that going to impact, like you're talking about, very good departments that do good things? Because as we know, when we talk about this maybe in more detail, when tech people, maybe tech bros, don't learn enough about the humanities, they do things that create social media sites that may or may not have been involved in genocides in other countries, right?
Right, right. Like good humanities, rigorous humanities training is designed to develop critical thinking skills, right? Like, can you step out of your perspective and appreciate another perspective, even if you don't adopt it or accept it, right? And then the other thing that I think good humanities, rigorous humanities training does is that it helps us develop empathy for other people, going through other things, right? Different cultural experiences, religious experiences, whatever. And so when we don't have or when we don't support rigorous training in the humanities, we are cutting critical thinking skills, we are cutting empathy, which I would define as a skill. I know people think of it as an attribute, but it is something you can practice. So, when we cut those things, we have people who aren't flexing those muscles, and so they don't question the information that they've been given or the perspective that they have always embodied. And, they don't have the kind of empathy or at least the cultural or interpersonal sensitivity that we would want them to have, right? So, if you want to build a good society, then I think you need good humanities training all around.
And I do think it's interesting what you were saying about empathy and other people's perspectives. Not to make this all about myself, but
No,
you know,
please. I'm on your show.
so no, I there is a benefit in learning what you don't know. Like I remember reading Native Son by Richard Wright, and
Yes.
that's when kind of everything clicked. Like, yeah, there's some things I just can't understand, and so there's a group of people. I think they're called women. Maybe have you heard of these people?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
They do
no, but
exist.
right, but when you encounter somebody not from your background, it doesn't have your shared experience. It's very arrogant of you to presume certain things, and sometimes it's helpful for you. And I'm reminded of this every day by my 11-year-old daughter. There are times where I just shouldn't talk, and learning that is helpful. Some humility there, but also to your point about the humanities, some recent events in the world have made me think that part of when we discuss things from antiquity or any period of time in history, history is just super, super messy.
God.
And
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
there, right. And there's not a narrative, there's not a necessarily established, this is what everybody agreed on, or this is what everybody did. It's messy. It's a continuum. There's a lot there to unpack. And so when we try to go out and indoctrinate people through executive orders about teaching American quote greatness end quote whatever that is, that's really foolish because again, part of really understanding history and understanding how we got here is just understanding it's really really messy. There's a lot of competing voices, and who we choose to listen to says a lot about us, and maybe we should try to listen to as many voices as possible. Hence why I love labor history so much. But
Yeah. I mean, so, you're talking about this sort of appeal, this nostalgic appeal to American greatness, right? Like a historian like me would be like, whose definition of greatness are we talking about now? Right? Because that matters, right? I want to know what you are nostalgic for because that tells me about you and what you value and what you think was great, right?
or what you don't recognize is
As
out there,
greatness. Yeah, yeah.
right?
That's true too.
Like your perspective is so broad. I do think nostalgia is a disease. You brought that up. I think it can really be a disease.
Yeah.
Although I will admit this. I did see somebody pitch an X-Files reboot with Cyril and Deidre from Andor, and
Uh-huh.
I would be behind that
Okay, I would
100%.
watch that. I would watch that. Yeah.
I would completely abandon my dislike of nostalgia for that. I'm all in.
I would watch that and do a whole podcast, a whole series, right?
Oh, 100%, 100%. And just I love that show. I love that show. It's so good. So good. Andor is so good. But anyway, so we have side quested quite a bit. So let's divert over to what we had got on to talk about, although this is an interesting, hopefully, series of topics for everybody. But let's talk a little bit about messy history. And
Okay.
before we get into that, tell us how you became interested in antiquity. Give us your classic superhero origin story.
You know what's funny is that I have a different story every time somebody asks me this question. Um, I think I think the honest answer is I just pursued what I liked. I liked learning about antiquity. I think if I had to trace like a genealogy of my career, it probably started in college. I went to Wake Forest. Um, Back then, you had to take either two religion or one philosophy class, or two philosophy and or a religion class, right? So this is how our gen ed was divided. I ended up taking a religion class. I was pre-law at the time, and it was a course on the Gospels, and it was fabulous. It was taught by Professor Mary Foskett, who still works at Wake Forest, from what I understand. She was wonderful. She's still wonderful. Um, and I just decided to pursue it from there. It was really a sort of, you don't get these stories very often, but I think that it was one of these situations where I actually got to do the thing that I love. I know that's a rare sort of thing for people, and I feel very fortunate for that.
I do have to say this in case my friend Lee Rodeo, who played football at Duke, hears this, who is a not only a big Duke football fan, but a big Methodist himself. He says every time that Duke beats Wake Forest in football, it is proof that God loves Methodists more than Baptists, which is a very North Carolina specific
That
joke.
is yeah, that's right.
So
Yeah.
for those of you who don't know, Wake is a Baptist school, Duke is a Methodist school. So um, I feel obligated to tell that for Lee. Okay, so you started doing that, and then you made your way to Virginia Tech, and you have written a very excellent. Uh, I'm not sure if I'm using the terminology right. As I again, this is knowing what I don't know here, but you wrote Magic and Heresy in Ancient Christian Literature, which I
Yeah.
believe was part of a larger book. Is that part right?
It's a mini book. Um,
Don't sell it short. Just let's just say let's just go full book. So you wrote a book.
I did. Yeah, it's part of the Cambridge Element series. And those are designed for a more general audience than something like an academic monograph, which is for, specialists in the field. The Cambridge Elements really are designed to be picked up by people outside of the field, or like, undergraduates or maybe first year graduate students. So that's how that project came about. I was asked to write that.
And we're recording this on September 21st, but I believe this is out and available now. Is that right?
It is, yeah. And I have another book coming out in a couple of weeks, according to the production schedule. And that one is the sort of academic monograph. It's called Smoke and Mirrors: Discourses of Magic in Early Petrine Traditions.
All right, so we've got our reading assignments in part for this one, but when I read, so I'll lay my cards on the table. I think some people who've listened to the podcast may have heard this already, but when I listen to podcasts and it gets into heavy religious history, like when I listen to Emperors of Rome or History of Rome or whatever, and it gets into heavy Christian religious history where people are fighting over, fill in joke, whatever you want to make about some weird doctrinal element. I tune out and I cannot process it. Okay.
You don't want to listen to an hour and a half on the Nicene Creed?
No, no, I certainly do not. But when I read, and that's what I wanted to talk about on this episode, and hopefully you'll be kind enough to come back later. But when I read Magic and Heresy in Ancient Christian Literature, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it really
Yeah.
made the history come alive, especially for someone like me who's predisposed to not want to engage in that. I don't know why it is, but
We all
um,
have things that I don't like military history, for example, right? Like my eyes glaze over. So I get it.
But so tell us how this came about, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the specifics. But how is it that you ended up writing this?
So I was working on my sort of big academic monograph, again, which is being published second. But I wrote it first, and I realized that book is about magic. It's not about magic and heresy per se. Not until I hit the very last chapter, and then I was like, oh, actually, heresy is a category that I should have been talking about all along. And as I said, I was invited to write a volume for the Cambridge Elements series. Shout out to Andrew Jacobs, my editor, who was fabulous. But he asked me to write a volume, and I pitched this volume on magic and heresy because I was interested in how the two categories come to mean the same thing. Like, how does magic become a kind of heresy? Because it didn't make sense to me as somebody who studies magic in the ancient world. Heresy is a very sort of particular category. We can get into that later. But think about it, right? When we think about magic, we're usually thinking about practices that people engage in, magical practices, exorcisms, healings, things like that. Well, how then does that become heresy, which is a label that we apply to incorrect religious belief, right? So, how does that conflation work? It doesn't seem natural to me. And so that's what that project does is it traces when the category of magic sort of becomes intertwined with the category of heresy, such that magical practices now are viewed as heretical.
And what I found, well, I guess what we should do as we get into this and we start talking about this is we should probably define our terms a little bit.
Yeah.
But generally, folks, when you're thinking about heretical and magic and stuff, just think John Constantine. Great,
Yes.
fantastic. There's some animated DC animated movies with John Constantine that are really good. My wife is like embarrassed probably if she's listening to this, she'll just ashamed. But think John Constantine.
Yes. Yeah. Am I going to be kicked off the show if I say that I actually did like the Keanu Reeves movie?
It was good.
Okay. Okay. I know people who are Hellblazer fans have very serious feelings. I'm a Hellblazer fan who also happened to like the Keanu Reeves movie.
I think they're doing another one finally.
Are they?
I think so. But John Constantine, this is going to really side quest. So for those of you who are not familiar, there is a DC comic books character, John Constantine. He practices all kinds of dark arts, magic, whatever, and he's kind of an anti-hero, but awesome. And like it's an easy, like if you're in a movie script and you don't really know how to solve a problem, you just throw in a dude with magic, right?
That's right. Yes.
And he can solve pretty much all your problems. He's usually associated with, now my wife is going to be really mad about this when she's going to be so embarrassed she may divorce me. But if you go watch Justice League Dark Apocalypse War on HBO Max,
Oh my God, I'm writing that down.
oh, it is so good. So good. So everybody definitely check that out. Okay. It is great. I highly recommend that. But watch the Keanu Reeves one too. They're very different.
They're different. Yeah.
Yeah, the so the animated ones with John Constantine don't uh, get too much into the like, Christian element of it, but that's very heavy in the Keanu Reeves one. But it's still very good.
Yeah,
I
I liked it. Yeah. Um, I would say check it out.
absolutely.
They
All
also
right.
did a TV show, a John Constantine TV show that was canceled, but which was very good while it was running.
Okay, I'm putting that on my to watch list because my wife and I need a new show to watch. So we're gonna find that one. But let's define probably better academically than John Constantine for heresy. But let's define the terms magic and heresy as we're going to be using them in the remainder of the podcast.
Sure. So the first thing I would say is that concepts with a history cannot really have a definition. This is from Nietzsche, right? But it's something that I subscribe to. When you have a concept that has had such a long legacy, like magic, like heresy, it's difficult to define them because they're not static. So that's the first thing I would say is that these are not concepts that are static, that can be defined in one instance and have that definition be applicable, full stop, right? This is why I cover 400 years in both of my books, because one of the things that I'm doing is showing how these categories shift over time. So, with that said, one way to think about ancient magic is to think about it as a series of practices and rituals that are evaluated differently depending on the circumstances. That is, in some circumstances, these practices could be evaluated positively. We're talking about exorcisms and healings, for example. In other situations, these practices might be evaluated negatively. A lot of times, something like love spells, for example, are not going to have a positive evaluation. Necromancy, I can't think of a single time where necromancy is like, yes, let's do some more of that.
Well, if we remember Grimm, that caused a lot of problems.
You haven't watched Grimm,
Ooh, that's a good one.
is it?
Oh
Okay.
yeah,
All right. That's going to go on my list too.
that is a good one. I highly recommend Grimm.
Okay.
It is, it as like most shows, it goes on for a little too long, and there's some, characters in there that storylines that you're not crazy about, but it's a good show.
And it's a retelling of the fairy tales, right?
Correct,
Okay.
correct. And it takes place, I think, in Portland, and I can't remember somewhere in the Pacific Northwest which city it was, but it's really good. And they did so apologies to my wife's coworkers who listen to this podcast. If you remember the Dresden Files, which they tried to make a TV show out of on Sci-Fi, and it just never really came together. This came together really, really well and had the elements of the fairy tales, uh, the more realistic elements of them, and it was all very good.
Oh, I think I would like that.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's good, it's good. So so with magic, I think you kind of had touched based on this from reading your work. I think we also, well, I guess we should define heresy, and then I,
Yes.
I have a follow up after that.
Yeah, so the way that I would think about heresy, for the rest of this conversation anyway, is heresy is a label that's applied to those beliefs or groups or individuals that a given author wants to mark as being theologically incorrect or deviant. And it is often a label that's applied to somebody else, right? Like it's very rare that somebody is going to self-identify as a heretic because if you truly believe in something, then it's orthodoxy for you, right? Like that's the truth. So unless you're trying to be like cool or countercultural or whatever, you're not going to be like, "Hey, I'm a heretic, man."
Okay.
So think of heresy as a kind of label that's being applied.
And it's good because trying to make beliefs incorrect or deviant have no parallels to modern society.
Absolutely
So
none. Heresiology has nothing to do with.
that's a relief because I was getting a little worried there that that could apply to today in some fashion. So, whew, man, that's a load off. So, one
I
guy
mean, for
who's,
people, sorry, I don't mean to
no,
interrupt.
no, go ahead.
For people who are listening, I actually did write a project called Project 2025 as heresiology. So, heresiology, like this idea of sussing out which beliefs we think are incorrect or deviant, has major ramifications for what's going on. Yeah.
Um, on that cheerful note. Okay,
Yes,
so
yeah,
let's
sorry to burst everybody's bubble here.
let's say in the past. Let's say in the happy past. It seems like this one guy, Augustine, seemed really important to what you were writing about and what you were explaining. Can you give us a little kind of 30,000 foot view of who he was and how he fits into the narrative that you're telling?
Yeah, I think Augustine is, or Augustine, is probably the most important Christian thinker, full stop. Um, he's writing sometime in the very late 300s, early 400s. He's writing after Christianity has become the religion of the Roman Empire. And Augustine is important for the story I want to tell about how magic comes to be external to Christianity because I think that his works, particularly City of God, become so important to Western Christianity, that thinkers like Aquinas and like inquisitors and later Christian thinkers are all sort of incorporating Augustine into their own theology. So Augustine becomes like this incredibly important church father. And a very contested figure. I mean, since we're not talking about modern politics, I will not tell you that a lot of figures on the right actually read Augustine and have written about Augustine, right? And so this is a very contested figure. His legacy is very contested, but nobody denies how important his body of work is to the development of Christian theology.
Yeah, it seemed like and again, this is coming from a guy who snoozes constantly through this religious history stuff. So if I'm getting this wrong, please correct me. I will take no offense. But it seems like what he does is he takes kind of an established world order, or he looks at the world out there and he's like, I don't like this. I'm going to make this simpler. I'm going to make it devilishly simple. So it's going to be so simple that no one can really argue with me. There's good guys who are Christians and there's bad guys who are pagans. And anything that's not Christian, my definition of Christian is bad. Um, and then he kind of births this whole new ideological spectrum for us to operate our worldview or confine our worldview to. That was kind of the way that I interpreted that. Is that kind of what's at play there, or is there
Yeah, I
more
think
to it?
so. I mean, I think Augustine and his contemporaries who are writing in a period that historians will call late antiquity, which is, towards the end of, well, we'll just get into fights defining when late antiquity starts, but towards the establishment of Christianity as the religion of the empire, right? And so once Christianity becomes the religion of the Roman Empire, Christians start writing about themselves differently. They start conceiving of Christianity differently. They start thinking of Christianity as being both destined to be the religion of the empire and also like eternally ascendant and transcendent. So like Christianity sort of transcends history. And so one of the things that Augustine does is he's able to fold the entirety of Roman history into a Christian worldview, where into his Christian worldview, right? Like this is his version of Christianity, where you are either have good godly people and good godly miracles who are orthodox, right? Correct. Or you have heresy. And that heresy is performance of magic, it could be traditional Roman paganisms, forms of Judaisms, other forms of Christianity that Augustine doesn't like, forms of Christianity that may not have the correct belief in how Jesus relates to God, for example, right? So Augustine does exactly what you said, which is he takes like all of this religious phenomena and beliefs and all these things in the ancient world and he sort of reduces them and simplifies them such that we have this rigid good versus bad or good versus evil binary. And what City of God does is it asks us to interpret the world through this rigid binary between good and evil. And so all religious phenomena are now forced to be organized or categorized, right, into one of these two boxes, either good or evil. And Augustine's version of good is pretty narrow, right? It's just his version of Christianity. Everything else for him is magic laden paganism.
And so what part of what I was interested in and curious about, obviously to see that, Augustine was saying they not like us to the pagans in
He
City of God.
was.
But but it seemed like what was at play there was his attempt to construct a narrative that would deal with a competing power structure that could undermine the authority that the church was starting to develop into the empire. So basically, I guess if I had to armchair completely unprofessionally and unlicensed, mind you, psychoanalyze what was going on there, it seemed like there was a recognition that, hey, pagans have a power structure. The ancient Roman, and I know pagan is probably kind of an overly broad and incorrect term to use here, but the non-Christian religions have a power structure that could be a threat to us. We have to find a way to take them out, sort of. That's what it seemed like to me when I was reading that. Is that a way that we should kind of a rubric we should use to think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would put it in terms of power structure per se, because by the time Augustine's writing, Christianity really has sort of adopted the power structures of the Roman Empire. Like it's sitting at the religious, social, cultural epicenter of the Roman Empire, right? One of the things that is going on in City of God is that the city of Rome has just been sacked, right? Like this famous fall of Rome, right? And pagans, former aristocrats who had not converted to Christianity as it became like this religion of the empire are now blaming Christianity for the sack of Rome. And what they're saying is that your God is so weak that you could not protect the city from invasion. So what Augustine is trying to fight here is not just competing power structures, but also competing rhetoric about the relative weakness of Christianity, the relative inability of Christianity to protect the empire, right? You know this as well as I do. Romans believe that their empire was protected because of their relationship with the gods, through maintaining their relationship with the gods. And one of the criticisms Augustine receives is like, well, now we have Christianity at the center of the empire, and next thing you know, like Rome's being sacked. So he's sort of responding to that. I would argue, and maybe scholars would push back on me, especially scholars who know Augustine better than I know Augustine. But I would argue that one of the things that City of God does is that it gives him rhetorical ammunition for pushing back by reducing everything to this binary, this good and evil binary, right? So now he can say, well, it's not that, Christianity failed to protect Rome. It's that we still have these vestiges of demonic magic rolling around, and you guys need to get that together if you want, a protected empire. So that rigid binary allows him to do that. It allows him to categorize things as either good or evil, magic laden paganisms, right? And that's what he does.
So looking at that though, what and you discuss this in your book is it seems like he's having to deal with the fact that okay, well, Christianity's had this kind of uncomfortable relationship with magic for a while, and I've got to find a way to deal with that relationship now because it seemed like there used to not really be hostility between Christianity and what we might view today as kind of magical practices. Is that right?
I think I would characterize it as, different Christians had different attitudes, and that the attitudes are not just negative attitudes towards magic, right? So if you read Matthew's gospel, for example, I know that translators like to put magi in capital letters. I know that they do that as if magi are like their own sort of category of practitioner. But, Matthew's using the Greek term for magic. It's the same Greek term that Luke wrote both Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, but it's the same Greek term that Luke uses to describe Simon Magus, who's a villain, right? So even in the canonical text, we have authors adopting different attitudes towards magicians. What happens by the time we get to Augustine is that Christianity has now had like 300 some years to negotiate how it feels about magic, whether or not it's a magical tradition. And let's be real, like Christianity has a lot to sort of explain away because Jesus and the apostles were thought to have done exorcisms, healings, things that most people would have viewed as magical. And so by the time we get to Augustine, Christianity has developed this entire discourse of miracles as being a completely different class of category to magic. And this is a constructed difference, is what I'm arguing, right? Like it is magic. They are engaging in magical practices, but Christian texts are trying to construct this difference between Christian practitioners and those who are non-Christian or not the right kind of Christian.
Right. And so then that's when it gets into kind of what we're doing is a miracle. We're engaging in miraculous activities. You are engaging in heretical magic activities. But I get when I was reading it, it seemed like there was some understanding or some kind of as an adult who has a teenage son who can drive. Your kids are doing something that you probably would prefer they not do, but you can't stop them. So there's this kind of
Yes.
passive acceptance of it, right?
Yes.
Is that kind of a way to maybe frame it in our mind that for a while there had been this kind of passive, like, well, yeah, I mean, they're doing their magic thing, but well, can't really ruin their fun. They're kids, they got to have fun.
I guess I can do.
Right.
I think what we see is a actually Christian authors um trying to get their audiences to stay away from magicians. I don't know.
Oh, they're the bad kids who just moved into the school. I got it. I got
Yeah, I don't know how
okay.
successful these authors would have been, right? One of the toughest things to study as a historian of antiquity is like to what extent do our texts reflect historical realities? And so the answer is we're not really sure, but when it comes to Christian theology, one of the things that we do know is that a lot of our authors protest things because their congregants are doing the things, right? So, like, if you read Paul's letters, he's saying things like, please don't sleep with your stepmother. That's because there was somebody in Corinth who was sleeping with his stepmother, right? Like, so when our authors protests like this over and over and over again, like Augustine does, a historian like me grows suspicious, right? Because I'm always interested in the things that are not captured by evidence. And I'm like, Augustine, why do you have to keep telling people, right? Like, the Christianity has nothing to do with magic. Is it because Christians on the ground probably did some magical things here and there? Um, and I tend to think that yes, it's probably because people are messy. We don't subscribe to the labels that are imposed upon us. We're gonna do what we're gonna do anyway, just like your kids with a license, right? Like, there are only so many things that you're gonna be able to control there. Yeah.
Look, the statute of limitations is long gone on anything I did when I was a teenager. So I, you know, I remember we're all kids, we do dumb things. But I like your approach, although part of my mind, I was kind of thinking about this is where it gets into it being messy because, for example, not to go into something too modern, but we as a society demonize trans people, and I hate it. I really, really hate the
Yeah,
way that we demonize trans people.
me
I
too.
will say this: I'm an OG millennial. I was born in 1981, and I grew up in the Bible Belt,
Same.
upstate South Carolina, and there was a kid who was a few years older than me and my older brother who was trans and went from female to male, and we just accepted that. And that person, I think very highly of. I worked with him at a restaurant for many years, and I saw firsthand the emotional baggage. I'm trying to oh, put this in a way that's understandable, that's not kind of condescending and trivialize it. But that person was dealing with a
Yeah.
lot, and that's what I'm saying when I'm using the term emotional baggage. There was a lot, and I can't imagine what it's like to look in the mirror every day and feel like you should be something different from how you appear. Right? I cannot imagine.
Yeah, that's not an experience I have either. I
Right.
would say, as a scholar of heresiology, when we start using words like evil, demonic to talk about other people, that's when all the red flags go up for me because that is
Right.
dehumanizing, right? And that is really, really harmful.
Right, and the reason that I was bringing this up is you were talking. I was thinking about this as you were talking about, hey, these guys keep saying stop practicing magic. Well, why? There must be a reason for it. But you think about all these stupid bathroom bills and all these need to well, all these efforts to pass laws about sporting activities instead of letting each community, because I think we dealt with that as part of our community in a way that worked for us that may not work somewhere else. And you've got to let kind of people figure that out because you're dealing with a human being going through a very challenging thing that I can't even comprehend. Um, how hard it must be. but historians could come back later and look at this and say there must have been a huge problem with or a huge issue with trans people and where to go. And then you kind of get on the ground, right? And you're like, well, no, this really isn't that big, that common of an issue that it would necessitate all these laws, right?
Right, but that tells us something about the people who keep making these laws.
Right. And that's what I wanted to ask you about. So is it that this happened a lot? Like, to go back to example, like, hey, these people keep sleeping with their step relatives, or was it just maybe it happened once or twice and some dude freaked out about it and now we have all these texts?
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Paul, it was Paul freaking out about that one dude.
Right.
Now it's in the Bible and now we're reading it, right?
Hmm.
But for, just texts in general, the truth is we don't really know. The I think the impetus to ascribe like evil and demonism to the practice of magic indicates to me that there were enough people who were dabbling in magic that it made someone like Augustine say, "Oh boy, we got to start making difference between miracle and magic," right? But unfortunately, we simply just don't have the data, or we wouldn't know what data to even look at to see to what extent, are people dabbling in magic? We do have some material evidence. So, like, if you look at the text of spells, we have some spells where Jewish, Christian, and pagan gods are being invoked in the same spell. So we know that, like, whoever used that spell clearly wasn't making distinctions among various religious groups. They were just using the spell. We have textual evidence from Origin of Alexandria. He is writing in the third century, and he says, the name of Jesus is so powerful that even evil people who use it can use it for exorcism. So we know that non-Christians may be using Jesus's name in order to perform exorcisms, right? So what we have is this huge mess, and it's very difficult to try and understand how many people, let's say, in a congregation were going to magicians. But we do know that the practice of magic, the things that magicians offered, like healings, like exorcisms, like love spells, were incredibly popular. Love spells, even though, like, you probably don't want to be doing that, right? Like, that's a negatively evaluated activity. It was not looked upon positively. But we have so much evidence from ancient love spells. So, people are going to do things that you tell them not to do. That has been true for a very, very long time. Unfortunately, unlike today where we do have evidence, right? Where we can say, actually, you guys are worried about trans women in sports. How many trans women athletes do you think there are in the US? Not that many, right? Like, we have the ability to gather that data now. It's difficult to do that when you're looking back on something 2,000 years later.
Well, unless we get the Bureau of Labor Statistics people in charge of it, then I'm not
Then I'm
so
sure they would
sure.
have lots of statistics for us,
I
right?
know, I know.
Lots of
I do
evidence.
not, I do not envy future historians with all the data that's going to be available.
I don't either.
Trying
It's
to,
going to be a mess.
yeah, it's going to be really hard, especially if you're not there to kind of get the context. Like, understanding what a phone that plugged into a wall was and what its purpose was is a good example to kind of demonstrate the problems that you can have trying to look back, which again, history is messy. One of the things, and again, well, I've made very clear, I really dislike is a calm way to put it, the way that trans people are treated. I just the way that they're bullied and treated for political purposes is just shameful. But
It is shameful. Yeah, it is.
yeah,
We as a society should be ashamed. Yes.
yeah, yeah. That's not the focus of this episode, but it's hard for me not to just say that again and again. So, but anyway, one thing that I'm gonna go back though to what we're talking about. You've talked about miracle versus magic. We've used the term miracle a couple of times. What does that mean in this context of the late antiquity era, trying to make sense of the sack of Rome and trying to create this new world structure?
Yeah, I think what is happening, And it doesn't even have to be as late as the sack of Rome. I think as early as we have Christian texts, we're seeing this tendency among Christian writers to help construct and elevate a distinctively Christian kind of wonder working, which I'm calling miracle. Our authors usually refer to it as like signs and wonders or signs. But they are talking about activities that would have been recognized as magical by Romans, right? So again, healings, exorcisms, things like miraculous jailbreaks. We see those in the Acts of the Apostles, for example, right? Even, things like curses. Peter kills people in the Acts of the Apostles through what looks like a curse, but it is attributed to the work of the Holy Spirit, right? So you have this entire category of wonder working that is being created in these Christian texts that is being elevated above beyond just Greco-Roman magic, right? And so what happens over the course of hundreds of years is Christians say, like, actually, we don't do magic at all. We do miracle. Our miracle is powered by Jesus or powered by the Christian God, whereas everything else is powered by demons. And that's where we get a binary, like you see in Augustine, where he's saying, well, there's good divine miracle, and then everything else is just terrible demonic magic, right? Augustine represents to me a kind of culmination of this discourse of miracle that's being constructed in Christian texts for the first like 300 and some years.
So as I'm thinking about this, as I read the text, it seemed like what happens is these writers start saying, look, magic is seductive and it's simple and you can use it and it's powerful, but it's wrong. So it's kind of like the dark side of the force, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And is that because I'm thinking about it in the context of what you were saying about Augustine saying to the pagans, well, you have this really strong point here about what happened to Rome. So instead of addressing that, I'm just going to attack you and attack your religious practices. I mean, is
I
that
mean,
part
that's
of
what he does, right? Like he thinks
right? Yeah, I mean,
all
but I'm
Roman
just
gods are demons, right?
right. And so I'm just, is that how we should think of kind of what he was arguing there? Or should we think about it more as he's really trying to, I'm sure he believed in all this. Is this, an outgrowth of his actual beliefs and kind of what he's consolidating together for like a new religious philosophy?
I mean, I think it could be both, right? There's no reason why we have to ascribe one sort of rationale over another. I mean, I think we're talking about somebody who's very smart, right? Like Augustine is a very smart writer, very thoughtful, very nuanced. He knows what he's doing whenever he's reducing like the entirety of phenomena to good miracle versus bad magic, right? Like this is a guy who has multiple definitions for divine grace. You can't tell me that he's not nuanced. So there's clearly an impetus to simplify in order to allow Augustine to apply these labels of magic and heresy. But I also think that I like to leave room for the things that we cannot measure as historians, right? Like, I don't know how to measure to what extent Augustine truly, truly believed in what he was writing, or whether or not he thought it was all mostly political expedient. I don't know how to measure that. I will say that reading some of his other stuff, particularly Confessions, makes me feel like he really, really believed what he was writing. But I know of no meaningful way to measure that as a historian. How do we break into somebody's brain and figure out what they really, really think as opposed to what they put down on paper?
Right. Yeah, that is, and that's why when I was asking the question and I hit this up correctly, I said to myself, maybe putting this in a binary choice while fitting given the topic is wrong. Uh, but what I found interesting about this, and this is part of why generally I skip these podcast episodes, yet I'm doing an episode about it now, so I'll try to work that out in my brain later. But it seemed like the fighting that was going on, this infighting over whether you are a believer or you are a deviant practitioner, part of the Sith army out there, right? The
Right?
evil Dark
The
Lord.
magical Sith army. Yeah.
Right. It just like reminded me of all these, and this is very esoteric, but as someone who grew up listening to punk music, it just like these fights about what is and isn't punk. It's like, can't we just enjoy the music, folks? Can't we just have a good time and like this band? Because they're pleasant to listen to and they put out good music. Like, hey, like, sure, maybe I don't believe 1/10 of what you believe, but we agree on 90% of this stuff. Can't we all just like sit down and hang out and have a good time?
I mean, I think with magicians and magic, that's going to be a hard sell for someone like Augustine, right? Because by the time we get to when he's writing, right, the form of Christianity that's most dominant is monotheistic. And I say that because there are polytheistic forms of Christianity in the ancient world. So we can just table that. But I want to be clear. The form of Christianity he's subscribing to is a monotheistic form of Christianity. And if you have entities that can power wonders, that can power marvels, that can exorcise demons, that can help you with healings, and you subscribe to a monotheistic system, then those entities have to be demons, right? So for him, I think that this is a has to do with like divine agency, right? Like who is powering the wonders that are being worked here? Is it God? Is it Jesus? Because then it's a miracle. Or are you, appealing to traditional Roman pagan gods? If you're appealing to traditional Roman pagan gods, then you're worshiping demons because according to Augustine, all of those gods are demons, right? So for him, like he has to make this difference. He can't just enjoy the music and have a good time because if he does, then he allows space for those traditional gods to be something more than demons, perhaps.
And that's why I keep coming back to it in my mind is like this was some form of societal social control and power structure because if you acknowledge that these magical practitioners and other religious organizations, which might be the wrong term, but these more traditional Roman religions have power, right? And some agency, then you're sort of threatening your own thing and your own power base, right? So it's hard for me to break it out of my head and say this is nothing more than a power dispute playing out through religious means.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say that it's always, and maybe this is just me as a historian and my own approach, is to not come down on any one explanation for a historical event or a text or something. It's always both and, right? So for me, like this is very much, you've read the book, so you know that Augustine's formulation in City of God becomes used by later European empires to impose all sorts of imperial, religious, and state control, including things like witch hunts, for example, right? And the Inquisition. So
There
it
were a lot of those I heard from like 2016 until like
witch
2024, and then it
hunts.
just
Yeah.
stopped.
Unfortunately, we have not, gotten rid of the witch hunt, apparently. But so we do have Augustine's work being used as a mechanism for trying to impose social control. And here I would go back and say, humans are messy creatures, right? Like, we do not like being controlled. We do not like being told what to think. We do not like being told what to do. And I expect Augustine had the same problem back then, right? Is there were plenty of people who were still going to see magicians. There were plenty of people who were not practicing Christianity in the way that he in particular prescribes. The other thing that sort of figures into all of this is that we have to remember that the ancient literacy rate is very low. So I was always taught, and somebody who works on reading practices in Rome could probably correct me, but I was always taught that it was around 10%. So you're talking about like 10% literacy rate. There are some texts we know were read out loud. We know the letters of Paul were read out loud, and so everybody would have gotten the content of that. But when you think about a 10% literacy rate, who is reading Augustine? Who is reading the heresiologists of the second and third centuries? It would have been their elite literary circles, right? Like they're sort of co-writers. Would it have been the everyday Christian who is going to worship? I'm not sure. And I don't think that that's an assumption that we can actually make that everyday Christians would have subscribed to whatever Augustine puts on the page or whatever John Chrysostom puts on the page or Justin Martyr, whoever, right? There is a strata of evidence that is just lost to us, unfortunately.
Right. And I do to your point, I did want to make clear I wasn't suggesting when I said it's a power struggle that these people did not believe in their faith. I want to be clear, I was not suggesting that because I do think they did believe, but there's also a power element here
Oh
at
yeah,
play.
yeah.
There's also a clear power element here at play. But what I what I did find interesting was the fact that, you know, Augustine has to say so many times
Yeah, he does.
magic and Christianity are not the same thing. It's like, wow, you really keep bringing that up. Like, why do you keep bringing that up? And to your point about the fact that elites, and not to use, it's hard because we're using modern terms, but the people at the top of the social structure or social ladder in antiquity clearly led different lives from most everybody else. Again,
Yeah,
no modern day parallels, none.
none.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's interesting that he's having to say that so much because clearly you would intuitively at least think there must be something here that he's concerned about that's
I do.
affecting, right,
Right. Yeah.
right,
I
whether it's real or it's at least it's perceived by him.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly perceives magic to be quite a threat to the Christian empire. And so he has this rigid binary view of how do we assess magic? Well, it has to be evil demon worship, right? Um, so yeah, I do think that power is implicated in all of this. I mean, I write about power. This is what I do. So I would never say that, just because these are what we're seeing are trends in text, that somehow it does not also lend itself to mechanisms for social or religious control, because we know that it does. Um, but like you, I also tend to think that, these writers wrote about the things that are meaningful for them for whatever reason, whether that's, they really, really, really believed it, or they were mad at this one particular dude and they needed to write 5 whole volumes talking trash about one dude, right? Like, so our writers write about things that are meaningful to them for whatever reason, but that does not mean that these writings are not implicated in larger power struggles. They are.
Right. One thing though that I find interesting though about this, and we've kind of danced around this some, and we've come at it kind of from different ways, but if you were to explain to people what these church leaders and these religious figures at the time, with the Christian church, are seen as the threat that magic is posing, is it that, well, you don't have to listen to your bishop, you don't have to listen to the traditional church structure that we've kind of raised up and created here, you don't have to listen to your priest? Is it that something is existing outside of that religious body that they don't have control over? Is it 10 things? I mean, what would you kind of boil it down to at its essence as far as the threat that at least they see from magic?
Yeah, I mean, so the threat would be different depending on what era of formative Christianity we're looking at. By the time we get to Augustine, magic is bad, it's evil, it's demonic. And so just participating in it for Augustine is like bad enough, right? Like already at that point, when you're participating in magic, you're already a heretic because it's bad and demonic and evil. The threat might have been different to an earlier Christian writer. So if you look at something like Acts of the Apostles, you'll notice that it's not magic per se that's being like criticized there. It's particular practitioners of magic. And why they're being criticized is because they are attempting to usurp apostolic authority that's being reserved for Peter and Paul, right? So these magician figures are competitors to the heroes of earliest Christianity. And so in a text like Acts, the threat here is, well, what if these magicians become confused for apostles? We can't have that. Peter and Paul and Jesus are just totally different from marketplace magicians. And so that's one of the differences. It's not explicitly stated like that, but I would argue that this is one of the distinctions that's being created in a text as early as the Acts of the Apostles. So different Christian writers are looking at the threat that magic poses in different ways. If you're looking at, texts that are written in the context of Roman persecution of Christians, for example, starting in 250, right? One of the threats that magic might pose in 250 is that magic becomes increasingly criminalized in Roman law, starting in the second century. And so by the time we get to 250, where we hit persecutions, magic is thought of as bad religion. If you are a Christian thinker or a Christian leader, and you have inherited this tradition of the founder of your tradition, Jesus, doing miracles, the heroes of your tradition, that would be the apostles, they're also doing miracles, and you know that Christianity has been accused of being magical multiple times in the past, underneath the context of persecution where magic becomes criminalized in the Roman Empire, you can see why Christians would be like, no, no, we don't do that, right? Like, we're already
That's
at,
that dude over
yeah,
there,
that's
not
that
me.
guy over there. That's not
Right.
us. We do miracles. So, all of that to say that the threat that magic poses is different for Christian writers writing under different contexts. And by the time we get to Augustine, just it's enough to just participate in magic. That's enough. That is inviting the demonic. And that to him would have been enough of a threat.
And it seems like part of it too could be like, well, like you're just talking to an average person on the street, right? In the empire, and Christians are proselytizing, doing their missionary work. Hey, believe what we believe. And they're like, why do I need to believe what you believe? There's this guy over here who can do all this magic stuff that you do, right?
Yeah. Why am I going to buy into the entire tradition? I can go down to the marketplace and get an exorcism for a few obols, right? Like,
Right.
what? You want me to come to service every week?
Right. So, and I could see where there would need to be a way to distinguish yourself in some way from that structure that's there. So, I'm not. uh, That's a gross oversimplification of everything, probably, but on some kind of basic human level, as you're trying to convert people, that's probably something that you did encounter or they would have encountered, and you have to explain why what you're doing is different, right?
That's right. We're talking about a context in which a lot of people believed that magical practices worked, right? And so if you were faced with a congregation where people believe that these practices worked, and you know that they can go get these practices or they can go get an exorcism or a healing right in the marketplace, you have to be able to explain that, right? So this is what we see Christian leaders doing. They sort of explain away the efficacy of magical practices as being demonic, and then they say like, well, actually we do like real miracles, and our real miracles are powered by the Christian God.
And so it's kind of like, if you think about it in business terms, coming up and overtaking something that's in front of you, right? Like if you're a
Hmm.
new business, like you're Netflix and you're taking out Blockbuster, for example.
And they took out Blockbuster, didn't they? Yeah.
Blockbuster did itself no favors, but oh man, I do, even though I'm not a nostalgia guy, I do miss Blockbuster quite a bit.
I miss Blockbuster too. I miss the feel of walking into a store and choosing what. Yeah.
And not
You're
to vent too
not an
much.
OG millennial. You don't know that feeling.
Right, yeah. If you're not a late Gen X, OG millennial, you don't know what we're talking about.
That's right.
But uh there's too many streaming services now. Like I'm
Yeah.
about to join boycotts just to cancel these services because there's just
Seriously.
too
Yeah.
many. There's too many.
Just give us TV back. Just give us TV back.
Oh man, it's too much. It's just too much. And we got rid of Apple, and I kind of regret that now because they have
Yeah.
all like the good sci-fi stuff on it coming out now.
I
So,
didn't know that. I don't have an Apple subscription, so
and they're
speaking
trying
of
to.
canceling subscriptions, I have very few.
Oh, it's when we got kids, so you have to have Disney, and then you got.
Too.
I
Yeah.
love It's Always Sunny, and so does my wife. So we got to have Hulu. You gotta.
You do have a lot of, you know, my subscriptions are like Crunchyroll. Like that's my subscription.
Well, and it's like it's football season, right? So you got to have YouTube TV,
Okay.
right? You got to have that. And my son's big into the Premier League soccer, so that's YouTube TV helps. And then sometimes you got to have Peacock, and it just
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
too much. It's too much. It's too much. So where I'd like to conclude on this is one, everybody get a copy of this, read it. You'll learn a lot, and it's told in a
Oh,
way
thank
that's
you.
very understandable and very interesting, even to a guy like me who normally just this is not my thing, right? But one of the things that I would like to talk to you about, and it's a little kind of more open-ended, but as I'm listening to this conversation, we're talking about magic, we're talking about Christianity, we're talking about how it developed, how these two things developed in a relationship with each other.
In a relationship with each other. Yeah, that's important.
Right. And so we're not attacking anybody here. We're more talking about how this occurred. So I don't want people to think that we're dogging a certain group or insulting a certain group of belief systems or what have you. We're not doing
No,
that. We're
no,
just
we would not. Like that's
no.
unethical.
Right. No, we're having a conversation about this. But I want to get your thoughts on this because as I've been listening to you discuss this and talk about this, it reminds me of kind of the framework that I've created for when I have historical discussions is the facts of what occurred are objective, right? This fact happened, this fact happened. Those are all objective things. But how we tell it,
Yes.
how we tell history is inherently subjective.
Yeah.
And what we give meaning to and consider important is a subjective value judgment that we're making. Like, well, you chose to write about this because it has
Yes.
subjective value to you, right?
Yeah.
So I just would like to, and I know I didn't put this on the outline, so I apologize, but get your thoughts on how people, when they approach history, when they read history, when they try to get a better understanding of things, how they should keep in mind what they're reading and how they should think about it, which is very broad, and I apologize.
That's a great question. Yeah. So I always tell my students a couple of things. One is that history is never sure. That is, we never, like, there are objective, observable, verifiable facts.
Like
There,
we faked the moon landing.
right, right. But history is never sure. Like there are objective, observable, verifiable facts, but then you also have to leave room for the things that you did not observe, particularly like me, right? Like I'm an ancient historian, my evidence is 2,000 years old. So I tell students that, doing ancient history is really like looking at a smashed up building, like just the rubble of a smashed up building, and attempting to produce the original blueprints of that building. You are not going to get it right. 100%. You're just not, right? So you have to leave room for the possibility that one, we can be wrong as academics. I know that's hard, but we can be wrong. Two, that history is not sure, that there is evidence that you are going to miss, evidence that doesn't exist, stories that fall below the historian's gaze. And that three, that history really is not just about excavating the past, it really is about writing better futures, right? Like, what are these awful, horrible things that happened in the past that led to these awful, horrible outcomes? What are the factors, whether that be discursive, like I work on discourses, whether those factors be discursive or material or physical or imperial state? What factors lead to a particular historical event or historical phenomena? And if it's a negative historical event or has negative effects, like how do we resist the replication of those factors, right? I would say that we're not doing such a great job right now, but I really do think of history as a kind of hopeful endeavor for imagining better futures. But you're right, right? Like when we pick up a book that is, classed as history at Barnes and Noble, we should know that whoever wrote this book has an interest and a bias in this particular subject. Like they chose this. But we should also push that to the evidence that they chose too, right? So when I was writing Magic and Heresy, obviously I could not include all Christian writings in that book. I had to make choices about which writings I included, and I included the ones that eventually helped. I included writings that eventually became part of the tradition that we now know of as like Imperial Roman Orthodoxy. But there are plenty of other traditions, other Christian traditions I could have chosen writings from. So I look for historians who are honest about the fact that they're choosing particular sources, or and they're honest about what they want those sources to do. Again, right, one of the questions that I always tell my students to ask when they pick up any sort of historical writing is, what is this author trying to do? What does this historian want you to take away from this? What are the stakes involved in writing this piece of history? Because nothing we write is ever neutral, right? Nothing we write is apolitical. I know everybody wants everybody to be apolitical these days. History is it's inherently political.
Another word for that's compliant.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what you said about building better futures, because authoritarianism is cool again, apparently, which is really weird. But I do think, when one of the challenges when you I'm I'm sure that you deal with this in what you write about and when you teach it, is it's when we're talking, we probably should have talked about this at the beginning, but I didn't think about it till the end, so that's my fault. I'll probably put in some intro or something, but you're talking about a very sensitive subject, people's faith, people's beliefs, people's kind of what we've been raised on. And you're trying to explain how this came about. And again, it comes back to what we've been talking about the whole time. Well, it's kind of messy. It's
Hmm.
not pleasant, because you have to keep in mind these are all people, and people do things that aren't great. And um, we've talked about this with our kids, is not taking historical figures or present day figures and making them role models or making them like heroes or idols, right? Like what I've tried to tell them, because, and I'll give this example as somebody who went to, I call it W&L, but Washington and Lee Law School in Lexington. When we went there, Lee was like a semi-mythical figure. He really saved the school. There would really be no, certainly wouldn't be a university without his efforts after the Civil War.
I
But
didn't know that actually.
yeah, no, he, like, that school was basically dead, and he saved it. They purchased the law school. He brought in a Spanish language department.
Wow.
Engineering was important to him, with his military background, and he made the honor code the lifeblood of the institution, which it is. I mean, the honor code is the lifeblood of W&L. It's one of the most important things. But he had become kind of like this mythological figure, and he did some things that are horrible,
Yes.
which is an understatement to say. He did some. I mean, he committed treason against the United States. He broke his oath.
He
He
got a whole bunch of Americans killed.
Correct. He was a leader of an insurrection against the United States, and he was fighting for a system that we all ought to be able to say was awful and inhuman.
Yeah.
Again, these are mild terms to use.
Right.
And when you look back at historical figures, you see that they did good things, they did bad things, and what we try to teach our kids, I'm not trying to whitewash or apologize for the horrendous things that Lee did here by having this conversation. Um, but when you went through W&L, you kind of came away with this idea of Lee as this heroic figure, and that's, I think, the wrong way to take
Oh,
it. That's the
okay.
wrong approach. And I don't think the school was indoctrinating you that way or trying to indoctrinate you that way. It's just
Right.
he was such an important guy to that school. It's easy to come away thinking that, right? But what we've told our kids is, look, you just have to look at the acts that people commit, what they do. And if they're good things, emulate those things, but do not worship or idolize the person. Right.
I think
And,
that's good advice. Yeah.
and when we talk about the name, and I could go on for a long time about the problems that the Lee name has caused W&L, and I think they've actually handled it pretty well. because again, there's no there is not a school without his efforts, right?
Right.
There's
So they
not
have to acknowledge him
correct. You have to acknowledge
in the
him,
name.
right? Well, and one of the things like we as you try to have historical discussions with your kids, like we tell our kids like look, there's a lot that was wrong back then. Okay, there was a lot that was wrong back then, and that's going through all of it's beyond the scope of this podcast, other than to say the obvious, slavery, right? But what one of the things we try to tell our kids is part of the reason that Lee ruined his legacy and who he could have been had he stayed with the Union is he had no imagination to see a world outside of the narrow confines that he existed, and people could not see a world without slavery. And that led him to make bad decisions. So, what we really, really bad decisions and do really bad things. What we try to teach our kids is you have to keep an open mind and be able to see beyond your narrow confines,
That's right. Yeah.
right? And when you lack that imagination is a simplistic term, but when you lack that imagination or that vision or that ability to see outside of what you're used to, you can do some really awful things. And again, this is a very narrow and general way to discuss the Civil War and what led up to it. And I'm happy to have those conversations with people in more detail, but that's not really the purpose of this podcast. But I'm happy to have those discussions with people at other times. So I do think again that goes back to the importance of the humanities
I think so too.
that you're
Yeah,
part
that's what
of.
I was gonna say, right? Like this is good humanities training. Imagining better futures. This is what we do in the humanities, right? Is we teach students to imagine better futures. Imagine more capacious, generous futures, right? Imagine more futures where more people have full human dignity, are accorded full human rights. Imagine a future where we don't have, you know, well, I can go on and on, but history
Right.
really is about, and I would argue that the humanities training in general is really about expanding our horizons intellectually, culturally, socially, and sort of imagining what a better world would look like and developing the skill set that will help us not just conceive of a better world, but sort of do some problem solving. Like, how do we build this better world? What are the obstacles in our way? What are the things we don't know that we need to know? This is what good humanities training does.
Right. And it's important when you're getting that good humanities training to apply it to today and also think about the past and what could have been had other people made different decisions. And I think
Oh, true. Yeah.
Lee is a very obvious example for people in Virginia to look at maybe how his life and how the Commonwealth could have been different and
Yeah.
how, the United States may have been very different. But that's again a conversation for another podcast, although it's a very interesting one to have. So closing matters. Where can
Okay.
we find you on the social media?
I'm on Blue Sky. My handle is Vox Magica. You can also search Shaily Patel, so you can find me on Blue Sky. That's the only social media I have. I'm not
That's
great on
smart.
social media, but yeah. So that's my one account.
That's smart. That's smart. Now, give us a good book to read. It can be any book about any topic, or it can just be about fiction, nonfiction, doesn't matter. And then give us a future podcast episode idea.
Um, so I think for the book, I have both a fiction and a nonfiction. So fiction, if you guys have not read the Sholomance series, it's about a magical school, but it's like a dark obverse of the magical school trope. It's really good, deadpan. It's like dark comedy. I would highly recommend it. It's good stuff. Um, there is a book that's coming out, so nonfiction. It's called Things Unseen. The author is Ellen Muehlberger, and I think it's going to be fabulous because that book, Things Unseen, is actually about the very things that I was telling Ben, like how do historians measure things like conversion, right? Like how do we know somebody really converted? Ellen Muehlberger is looking at things that are visible, like church walls, and she's analyzing them to get at the things that are invisible, like internalized conversion, right? I haven't read the book yet. It's not out, but I am a huge fan of her work. It's all hits. Her discography is all hits, and this is going to be another banger. Like it's going to be really good. Future podcast episode ideas. Hmm. I don't know. I think I'm pretty bad at podcast planning. What can I say? I
You,
think, have you been able to get Sarah Bond on to talk about strike?
I have reached out to her. If
Okay.
somebody knows her, she's like super busy, I think, right now. But if somebody
Yeah.
knows her and could reach out to her, because she has you are like the third person to suggest her. And so I think that means that the god or collection of gods, demonic, whatever they may be, I don't know how the world is organized, and I would not pretend to. But someone or something is telling us that this should happen. She has Roanoke ties too, by the way.
She does.
She's
Yeah.
got ties to the valley. So if you could plant that bug in her ear, I would be grateful because I love labor history.
Yeah, have you read that yet?
I have not read it yet.
It's worth checking out. Yeah, you
I
should check it out.
want to read that.
Yep.
I have had a lot on my plate in August and September, so I'm ready for these months to be behind me.
Same. Yeah. Settle into fall. It's Halloween time.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. If you want to find us online, go to the socials at Antiquity Pod for most of them. You can go to our website, classicalantiquitypod.com. You can call the podcast 540-632-0160. Ask a question, leave a comment. You will get on the air. If you have a question, either I will answer it or perhaps one of our guests will answer it. But again, call. We'd appreciate it. The theme music is by Brent Earhart. And stay tuned, folks. There are more episodes coming. I have to keep doing this because, as you know, the Classical Antiquity Sidequest is a podcast without end.